Hello and welcome back to this channel. I'm Ruth, and today we're going to be continuing the series of the true and the false prophet. But today we're answering the question, what prophets are specifically condemned in the scriptures? And to do this, we're going to turn to the book of Deuteronomy chapter 18, and we are going to focus mostly on verses 10 and 11, because in these verses we see a list of, prophets that have been condemned by God. So God spoke through Moses in this chapter, and I find it interesting because in this chapter, in verse 18, we see that God is going to raise a prophet, and we see how the prophet says, it's going to be like Moses. So we see that God doesn't just, have this prophecy of a prophet that's going to come, but he first tells the children of Israel practices which they need to get rid of, because they had been in bondage for such a long time. They had been in Egypt, and they adopted so many of their principles, because literally they live there. And a good example with that is, me, I'm in the UK, I live in England, and I've lived here my whole life. So even though I'm not originally from here, but I'm originally from an African background, because I've lived here, I've literally adopted most of the customs here. So I probably know this place from the back of my hand. But going to Africa, even though I have been there a few times, I don't know it from the back of my hand. And so it's kind of like the children of Israel going through the same experience. They were Israelites, but because they were in Egypt, they adopted the customs of Egypt. And God was like, he wants to make them like him. He wants to remind them of their former things. He wanted to remind them of the things which were installed in the beginning. So this is why in this chapter, God is listing out all these prophets which are literally not of God, which they had learned when they were in bondage. So now we're just going to read verses 9 to 18, and we are going to see how God has, told the children of Israelite to be aware, to basically stop these practices and literally to be perfect. Because what God does, and what is so amazing, is God is our Father. He tells us things because he wants us to be perfect. The same way a parent will probably correct their child because they want the child to be better. So in this chapter we also see the same thing. So now we're going to read Deuteronomy chapter 18 verses 9 to Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 9 to 18, but we are going to mostly focus on verses 10 to 11, because in verses 10 to 11 we are going to see the list out the things which are condemned from God, the false prophets which are condemned, which they got from the practices of Egypt. And even though, what I find interesting is, even though the Israelites may have not practiced it to the large extent that the Egyptians did, but even the little practices that they had, even though they were doing it, but to probably a smaller degree, it was still condemned by God. And it just really reminds me that when it comes to worship, when it comes to serving God, we have to serve God literally with our whole heart. We can't be saying, we want to hold on to this idol and hold on to that idol, but literally God is full service. It's not half and half in his work. So yes, we're going to read Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 9 to 18. It says, "When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abomination of those nations. Thou shalt not be found among you one that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through fire, or that uses divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord, and because of these abominations the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee. Thou shalt be perfect with the Lord thy God. For these nations which thou shalt possess hearken unto observers of times and unto diviners. But as for thee, the Lord thy God hath not suffered so to do. The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet in the midst of thee, of thy brethren like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken, according to all that thou desirest of the Lord God in Horeb in the day of the assembly, saying, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, neither let me see this great fire any more, that I die not. And the Lord said unto me, They have spoken well that they have spoken. I will raise up a prophet from among thy brethren, like unto thee, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them, and that I shall command him. In this verse, we do see that God says, stop those practices, and he wants them to be perfect. But for this study, as we are answering the question, what prophets are specifically condemned in the Bible and in Deuteronomy chapter 18, we're now going to just focus on verses 10 to 11, and I'm just going to read out the prophets which are condemned, and I'm also going to just say what this would be in like modern language, because I know this is the King James Version and we can think, we don't see one who does this and that. So I'm just going to simplify and show you what this is in like modern English. And we may think, these are very obvious, like literally everyone knows that a witch is bad. But we have to remember that in the last days, it's going to be more subtle. It's going to be, what we may see on the television screen, what are written in books and other things. So we literally have to be on guard, because what happens is that Satan is literally like a snake. He just weaves in and may just put a little thing in there, and it's actually installing all these things which are heathen practices. So we have to be praying, for God to allow us to focus on the things which are pure, just, honorable, of good report, lovely, because it says, if they are of any virtue and if they be of any praise, think of these things. So it's not only thinking, but what we watch and what we see and what we behold. So the first one that we see in verse 10, it says one that uses divination. So one that uses divination is someone who is a fortune teller. So today that could be, someone that wants to read your palm, someone that uses a tarot card. And as I said, people may think this is outdated, but literally this is in festivals, this is in theme parks. You see that person who is called someone to come and read your card, and they make it look very sophisticated. So we see that is number one. So the first one that is condemned is a fortune teller. So in the second one, we see again in the same verse an observer of times. So today in modern language, an observer of times would be someone who's an astrologer, and the most famous way which I see it today is literally in the newspaper. We would see, come and see your reading. Are you a Sagittarius? What are Sagittarius is like? Are you Aquarius? What are you going to have today? How is your day going to be based on your signs? So this is basically zodiac signs, and it's literally horoscopes. So we see the first one is So we see the first one is a fortune teller, the second one is an astrologer, and in verse 10 again we see it says an enchanter. So a enchanter is basically someone who is a magician, and today that could just be someone who uses trickery, someone who uses illusion to basically deceive the eye. So that could be those people that do the card tricks. And I think here in the UK, I don't think the guy is from the UK. I think he's from America. But I remember when I was younger, there was this guy, I think his name is David Blaine or something along those lines, where he had this box and he went 44 days without water. So we see here that even though these are customs which are ancient, these are customs which probably everyone thinks, it's done away with and it's no longer here, but we do see how these practices are still in this modern day. So we see so many illusionists now, and especially those who are coming big, those who are being celebrities. They are actually seeking and going to these people for counsel, and also for at their events. They're there to entertain. So we do see how these things are here. So we've now seen one prophet that is condemned is a fortune teller, an astrologer, a magician, and the next one is basically a witch. So this one is self-explanatory. So we see a witch is also called, today is called a female psychic. And in 1 Samuel chapter 28, we see that Saul goes to the witch of Endor. And Saul, just through his life, Saul had so many chances to repent of God, but he literally silenced the voice of God. And he got to a stage where he wanted to, where he went to the witch of Endor, and he was trying to seek seek the dead. He was trying to communicate with the dead. And when he did this, when he went to go and seek the witch of Endor, he actually died the next day. So we just see how these things are literally not of God. And an important thing to remember of a psychic. So a psychic is a female witch, and we are going to see what the male version is called as well. But these practices is very deceptive. But what is interesting about it is to have this in mind, is that God is the only one that can bring life. God is the only one that can create. So for example, by the time this video goes up, it would be what the people call Easter Sunday, and we see how Christ is the only one who can resurrect. Satan can literally not resurrect any dead being. So we see again with these people communicating with the dead, it's literally not of God. Only God can create. Only God can bring life to something. So yeah. So moving on, we are now going into verse 11. So now we're going into verse 11, and we see the word, it says a charmer. So someone who's a charmer is someone that literally just uses spells. And in verse 11 again, the next one is a consulter. So someone who consults with familiar spirits is literally someone who claims to speak to the dead. And I find it very interesting, because many people may say that this is comforting, but it's literally the work of Satan. And I just want to read a verse on that note, because this verse is a nice verse, and it's from Mark chapter 12 verse 27, because it talks about how God is a God of the living and God is not a God of the dead. So in trying to connect with the dead to hear things, it's literally not of God, because we know that God is a God who's alive. And it also says in Ecclesiastes that literally the dead know nothing. So when these people are communicating with the dead, they're literally communicating with Satan. As we know, Satan has, the power to be able to disguise and make things look like as they were. But we know that it's the spirit of Satan to be able to do these things, because we know that God is focusing on those who are alive. So it says that he is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Ye therefore do greatly err. So we see that when people are mingling the alive with the dead, we see that this is literally not God's will. It's not something which is edifying. It doesn't prove who God is, because God is a God of the living. So if you're trying to find some means with the dead, it can only be the work of Satan. So again, in the same verse, the next one we see is a wizard, and literally that is just a male psychic. So we talked about a female psychic, and a wizard is literally a male psychic. And then the last one is a necromancer. Hope I'm saying it right. And also this is a person who also consults with the dead. As we saw before, someone who is a consulter consults with familiar spirits. That can be the dead. But also this one, a necromancer is someone who consults with the dead. But as we read that verse, it says that God is a God of the living and God is not a God of the dead. So as we have literally just gone to verses 10 and 11 and identified what prophets are specifically condemned in the Bible, I hope it brought you a bit more clarity just to see what these words may be in the modern world. But also, as I made an emphasis before, it may not be so obvious in the world now, but it's just about, what we watch, what we listen to, and what we read. And we just have to be on guard and to be very careful of what we behold. And we have to guard the avenues of our soul, because Satan is trying so hard literally in these last days. But we serve a risen Savior. We serve a God that was dead and now is alive, as it says in Revelation, who was, who is, and who is to come. So even though these things are happening in this world, we can claim the promises of God. And the more we see Christ through the scriptures, the more we will be able to identify these falsehoods. But also, as I just making an emphasis that it's literally not going to be obvious, but we are to guard the avenues of our souls. So to end this, I just want to read Isaiah chapter 8, and we are going to look at this as well in another part of this series, because this verse, it talks about to the law and the prophets, if it not speak against them, it means there's no light in them. But it also talks about before familiar spirits in the previous verse. So Isaiah chapter 8 verses 19 and 20. So it says, and when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God for the living to the dead, to the law and to the testimony? If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. So as we just looked at this, these prophets which are condemned by the Bible, we saw a person who consults with the dead, male psychic, female psychic, a fortune teller, an astrologer. So we see that all these practices are literally not of God. And in Deuteronomy chapter 18, we see that God says that these spirits are literally not of God. And I just want to read a verse, because it says, for all these things are an abomination unto the Lord, and because these are abomination, the Lord thy God does drive them out before thee. Thou shalt be perfect with the Lord thy God. So we see that all these warnings, all God, telling these people to basically let go of these false idols, is because God wants them to be perfect, and these things are literally an abomination to God. So as we end this series, I just pray that we would guard the avenues of our souls, and that we would, search the scriptures, because by searching them, we would be able to discern, what is right and what is wrong. Because there is a time where we may not know what is right, but as we begin to know God, we are able to discern what is for him and what is not of him. So we shouldn't be so anxious or thinking, is this right? Is this wrong? But as with time, as we know God, God will reveal to you the things that are true and the things which are false. So have a blessed day. And in this series, the next series, we're going to be looking at gain is godliness. So we're going to talk about this topic in our next series, but the next video on this channel is going to be about worry is blind and cannot discern the future. So God bless till we meet again. Shalom, and I hope you have a blessed day. And also I'm going to put a link below in regards to the blog post in regards to series 2 on what prophets are specifically condemned in the Bible. So if you want to read it, I can put it underneath, because sometimes reading does make it clear. So shalom and have a blessed day.